Okay, so what I'm going to do here, and again, you need to have already documented this to the best of your ability, because the thing is, we have quite a bit of code now, and the better you understand that, as we understand this as we move into week 9 and moving into week 11 with your code review, the better you're going to be able to talk about this code. So me doing this step is really about you seeing like a check. This is like a check in the course to see how well. Now, all code reviews are that, but this is what I want. And here's a way I would talk about it. But, and also your understanding could be different word-wise as long as it describes this similar functionality. That's what's important, but it's good to have the terms as well. So in here, I said set a breakpoint. Now, before I do this, I'm actually going to go into my main and I'm going to get rid of some of the comments because they just get in the way. And I recommend you doing that as well at this point because sometimes it's hard to know, like in this case, the display output. I definitely would get rid of that. We no longer need it. Should not be in your code. Okay, so now that I have that on my main.js, I said set a breakpoint right here at render table. Okay, now at this point, in order for you to walk through the code, you have to activate, and in this case, right, have the event listener that's listening for the submit be activated by the browser, right? So this is so we need to trigger the event listener. Okay, so if I just put some random text, it's not until I hit submit that this event listener that's listening for the submit does this callback. Okay, so now I hit submit, and now what's already happened is it's prevented the default because by default it wants to look at the server. It's referenced the form that I set up as a global reference. Remember at the very top, right, we have a global form that points to the form ID that is found on the index file. And then in here, I'm grabbing the first name and the last name. I'm parsing the house value, right, because remember when you're doing it this way, it comes in as an int, as a string. So we're converting it to an integer. We then set the house size as the value from the input. Now in this case we're using a select statement, and in this case because we coded it with the name value, and if you want to remember that, you could go over here and look at the name is how we're referencing that value, and in this case for the house size, again we've given it the name, so whatever the user selects will be there. So then we gather that, we declare these in the block scope of this callback, but it's just a block scope. We then call start, passing in our values. Okay, again, we didn't even go over this, but just because we pass in, right, so we have arguments that become parameters, and now inside this function, we call two other functions. First, we call determine house size by passing in household members. What comes back, and if we go look at that, now in this case that code is not here, it's setting NC. Again, the reason we're not seeing this code walkthrough is based on where we set the breakpoint. Okay, so in this case we're calling this function by passing in, which one were we on? Household points. Okay, so in this case we're passing in household points, calling this function. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm actually talking about the right one. Oh yeah, so this is a variable we're declaring by calling determine household points by passing in house members. That's where I was getting thrown off just on the naming a little bit, which does happen, right? So we can see that both of them, in this case, return the points that are calculated. Okay, so then in here, when we turn those points, we then also calculate the total by adding the points together. We then say reference this global variable. We say push, and what we're pushing into that array that's setting out on global is an object. And this object has key value pairs. I'm not sure why that indented it shouldn't. I don't think it's it. And that's where you want your code to be well formatted. I'd go back. Matter of fact, let me just look at that real quick just to make sure that on that push, and that push is actually here, it's not. So just something else got thrown. So first name was first, which was passed in. Last name, again, this is coming in from the form submission from the event listener. We're setting up the values for the household members, the size, and also the points. So this is not just gathering the input from the user. It's also, in this case, gathering's a word that's correct for, getting the user input. For these, but in this case we're calculating the calculated values and the total itself. So we're capturing in this object all the key value pairs for both our input and our calculated data. Okay, so now once we push that, it pushes it, adding it in. We have our first entry. Okay, so again, I'm not even to here yet. Okay. So let's come back here, because once we do that, we then clear. Now the question of why we do this is that there may have been a prior submission and we are going to render the table. So now I'll step into this, which will open up the render file. Because it's a module. We've now set up modules to modularize and make our code more maintainable, and so that each file has a specific function that it is doing, or related functions. So then we set up the table. We define this table by calling another function, which is render the headings. Okay, so then we clear any headings that may have been set up. We create the table. We create the heading for the table. We create a row. We then, in this case, we limited this last week to just name and footprint. We'll fix that this week. We iterate over this array, okay? And by iterating over it, right, we're going to create a TH. The TH is... right, the heading, right? So actually it's head and then the actual heading itself. Okay, and then we set the context to name, right, by referencing the TH set context equal to the text. I didn't talk about this, but the text is actually the reference for each. So we're calling for each on that array. Okay, here's the array, and for each one of them, we say each time, first time name, second time footprint, that we use to create these TRs. So this is going to go through 2 times because there's 2 elements in the array. Okay, so now we're going to do it again. We're appending the child for the TH. And now we're saying, okay, make that. And by the way, remember, you can always go down here and look at what's being created so that you can see how we're building up the DOM dynamically. Table.append child, and then return the table, cool, right here. And now we're going, so this, remember back to when we were hard coding the table, we first created the table, and now we're going to create the body. And in this case, tBody, create element the body of the table. And because we could have more than one, remember this was when we were hard coding it, now we're actually basing the for each for the data. The data is a reference to, and this, by the way, this is a new term, passed by reference, really from the main where we passed in the CFP data. But in render, we just reference that as data. And the reason we do that is in case in the future we ever want to use this render table for something else. And it's just more clear. So then for each object in the data, we then are going to build a TR. Okay, so this is where we're building the TR. We're building the TD, so the row and the column. We're going to update the name, the text content, referencing the object dot, so it's the referencing of the key on the object. That's what we're doing on each of these. We then append the name, okay, into the TR, into the row. We append the total into the row, and then we append the tBody. So we take this structure that we're building up dynamically and then update the body. And in this case, because we decided we're not going to do the buttons yet, we commented that out. T, so now we're appending the body. So now, because you can look over here and see nothing has happened yet because we haven't, because this line, so we're first saying table, whatever your reference is for the table, right? So you can look at it. Really helpful. No, right now, the only thing there would be the headings, the row, right? The heading and the TH heading for the column. And now we're going to say append that. And now when you table, this is global reference. Now keep this in mind. This global reference is up here inside that render because we only need this in this module. So if we needed it elsewhere, we'd either have to paste it or include it or pass it. Okay, so now we append this, good. And now at this point, we can come back here. We're going to reset the form because that's good user interface, and then we're ready for the next submission. Okay, now, part of what I had you do was your understanding, right? Now what I want you to do is update anywhere that you feel you want to know more, or did that help you, or any other feedback about this particular thing. Because as I was moving into the next item here, I really realized that it is so important to understand what we've already done. And if you're not understanding it, now's the time, okay, as we move closer to project work. Okay, so I'm going to give you another commit message, and I'm going to say, right, your feedback about, was this worth it? Did it get more confusing? Give me your feedback here, and then we'll move on to doing conditional formatting.